So, welcome back to Everything Marketplaces, where we talk with founders and leaders from some of today's top marketplaces. So, this is episode 162, which is a really incredible group chat that we just had with Bastian Lehmann, who's a co founder and former CEO of Postmates. So, Postmates is, of course, a marketplace that we all know of, since it was an early on demand and delivery marketplace that scaled to being one of the largest. It was notably acquired by Uber in 2020 for a reported $2.65 billion. So this is a great chat with Bastian where we got to learn more about the founding story and first steps for starting Postmates, how they solved for some of the early challenges, what it was like building in such competitive markets, how they raised over 900 million from top investors, some of his key learnings now looking back, how he's taken this with him to more recently starting TipTop. We also had a great group Q&A. I really enjoyed this conversation and you're going to find it a great watch to the end. So, Bastian, as I mentioned right before I started recording, you've been one of the most requested group chat guests with founders here, and of course, paved the way for many of us in the world of on-demand and delivery marketplaces. So, it's a real treat to have you join us here today, and I'd like to start off by saying a huge thanks for taking the time to do so in advance. So we have lots that we're going to dive into with all of your incredible experience with Postmates. But before we do, I think it might be great if you can start off by briefly sharing your background for those that might not know you.
Background is probably just Postmates. I don't know if I have any more things to report that are sort of like worth mentioning. I grew up in Germany. I dropped out of college for industrial design, and then I thought of tried my first startup in '99, which was called 7 a Day, and it was like a reverse auction platform. And the idea was that there is certain products for sale every day, and just like in a Dutch flower auction, the price of the product for sale would drop, and eventually the savings would be so great that people would start buying it, or so we thought. But it turns out people didn't buy a lot of things online in '99. So we got used to books, but I think the rest still took a while. And of course, everything was incredibly expensive and there were like 5 people online. So the whole thing ate up the savings and not much more. I worked in consulting after that and had a few other startups or startup attempts. But I came to the US, I believe in 2010, at the end of 2010, and we started working on Postmates. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's a really cool background to hear about. So I guess, if we go back to the very beginning with Postmates, it's a marketplace we, of course, all know of today. But, what was the founding story and what were the first steps that you actually took to start it as a marketplace at the time?
Well, we actually, all of us, the 3 founders, me and one of the founders, Sam, we worked on a slightly different idea called Curated.buy, which was sort of like a real-time curation platform is what we called it at the time. So the thought was that certain people, maybe it's like Twitter lists, but instead of putting people in there, you would put content in there and people could subscribe to that. I think we called that bundles. Anyway, it was as stupid as it sounds, but there were a few people using it who were like media influencers at the time, and that got us some press. But we met this other guy, Sean, who obviously became my co-founder and is one of my best friends. And he worked at actually a really interesting startup called Hug Energy, and they were trying to build the world's most intelligent power strip. It would meter the consumption of devices attached to it, and it would help you turn things on and off in your house. Now, this is probably before like life science became cool. I think was the Nest thermostat. People got the hang of it. This was one of these products that was too early, and people didn't really care about the consumption of their devices much. So we started working on this idea that I had a while back, which I already had the name for Postmates, and it evolved quite a bit from what it originally was. I think the original idea was, can we sort of create like a local postal service that allows you to move things within a city. And turns out, that you needed a sort of catalyst for people to have the original use cases were like, what if you lost your keys or someone finds them and you want to get them to you? But I think pretty soon, and some other iterations were around, we wrote this really beautiful software actually that would do that. So it was one of the first iPhone apps, and it looked really great. It looked like a notepad, just like as if you were to skeuomorphic design was still huge then, and so you could type in the pickup address and the drop-off address, and you could enter a description, and you could upload a photo. So, and now we were here sitting, and we were like, okay, clearly now everybody is using this to get things delivered through San Francisco. And when that didn't happen initially, we signed a lot of retail stores. So we went to retail stores and we said, like, look, do you ever have people coming in here and they asked if you deliver? And many of them were like, yes, this just happened a minute ago, and I couldn't sell this chair because this person doesn't have a car. And we were like, well, use Postmates the next time someone wants to buy something and have it delivered. All you need to do is put the information in, and we'll deliver it for you. And we had like 20 stores signed up. There was a vintage store in San Francisco called Stuff on Valencia Street. There were El's Attire, which is a tailor in North Beach. Really just great retail stores. But the volume, and there was a bike company, and the volume was very low. But what happened somehow is that, in this app that I just described, that really had no sort of payment functionality whatsoever, because it didn't really exist. I don't think Stripe had launched yet, or they actually hadn't launched. So what would happen is that in the description, at the pickup, people would put in a store, a restaurant, or Whole Foods, and in the description they would put the things that they wanted us to get to them. And we had to cancel all these requests because we were like, you guys, this is not how this is supposed to work. And also, so we were actually annoyed by it because we didn't want it to be like a company that does that sort of thing. We thought about us a bit more as we want to build an infrastructure that is like used for commerce, not be the errands guy, right? And but we talked to some of the friends, and I think Jack Abrahams and a few other people. They suggested, look, maybe give this a try. And we were very reluctant because we said, how can we give this a try? Because people order an order at a restaurant. What do you want us to do? And we ultimately came to the conclusion, what if we just call and place the order and find a way to pay, or have someone pay for it? So now, again, there's no integration done. By the way, this is in 2010, there is no point of sales yet that have APIs that you could, even if you had an agreement, could hook into. A lot of places are cash, in San Francisco especially. So we did two things. We bought Visa gift cards, and these Visa gift cards, you get them at Safeway, and we would hand them to the fleet of couriers. We had around 25 couriers in San Francisco. 10 years later, obviously, you have, Ben Horowitz write about do things that don't scale, right? So this is before he even wrote a book. So so we gave these gift cards to the fleet. Now they're as good as cash. So you have this group of people that is not employed, and we wrote a little software that would frequently call there's a number on the back of the card, and you can you can type in a code and it tells you the balance. So we wrote a little software that would auto dial this number and check the balances of these gift cards, A, so that we don't get ripped off, and B, so that we could keep track of the spending. We also asked the fleet to write it down on like a little A5 envelope that they had that we provided. So we try to keep a tally of that. Now they had a way to pay. They could also get cash. So we would take cash out, and we were Silicon Valley Bank, and why do you need money? Why do you need cash? And this is so funny. Like, you get some funding, but nobody wants you to touch that money. So we were like, well, we just need it. So we ran some pocket cash as well, or like a tally for that, because a lot of the places that we got requests from, a lot of the burrito places, Mexican food places back in the days, that were El Farolito was cash only, and I don't know how many people if you live in San Francisco, but so we're now set to purchase things. But we obviously have no way to charge the customer, because again, the rails of just dropping in an API key and having an interface didn't exist via Stripe. So we bought a few dozen Square readers, and we set up a Square account, founders@postmates.com. And we would instruct our fleet that they take a photo of the receipt when they purchase the item, and their fleet app would show them the amount they have to punch in at the Square reader. And the loop was closed, right? So now the only thing we had to figure out is, how do you get people to order this frequently to make it a real test? So we couldn't just route every order to a Postmate, which is what we call the fleet, because only certain people had a Visa gift card or cash. So we tagged the couriers in our system with a hashtag #GetItNow, and we wrote an email, and I still have this email somewhere. And it says, there were a few thousand people that had downloaded the app. Again, we got lucky because some of the tech press really liked Curated By. And so when we then pivoted to Postmates, they wrote about this, and a lot of people then tried out Postmates and had the app installed that was pretty useless, but looked good at the time, I guess. So we wrote an email, and that email said, this weekend, if you use the hashtag #GetItNow in the description, in that little field, we go to a store and pick up the things that you want us to pick up, and we buy them for you. No questions asked. And we sent that email on a Friday. And by Sunday evening, I think we had sold almost $10,000 worth of goods from stores. It was that dramatic change from one thing to the other. Now, and with that, the wheels came off, because people wanted it, but every second order was wrong. The couriers didn't understood what to order, didn't read the description correctly, didn't know what to do. Long wait lines at restaurants, and nothing was optimized. But the one thing that was clear was that there was consumer demand, and people that used it that weekend, they tweeted about it, and they got In and Out, or they got El Farolito, and they couldn't believe it, because what is extremely important to understand is that there was no other service like this in the entire United States easily. But in San Francisco, even what was in place was so inferior to what one would be used to in New York, when you had a guy, or the liquor store would actually come upstairs. If you live in the village, you get someone to do these things. Even though with a lot of effort, New Yorkers had a different lifestyle. But in San Francisco, you had Inferno Pizza and maybe another place, and that was it. So people just couldn't believe it. And the only other thing that I say is we had to solve a third thing then in order to scale, and that's what we call the board. Now, you have to understand, up to this point, all of these orders were dispatched manually, because what do you need to write software for when you have 25 people? So the software that we use is they had devices. We tracked the devices on a screen, and we would see where they're going to, depending on what they had accepted, but there were no routes. And there was obviously no intelligence on routing anybody. So we had to manually run this board. And you actually can't write routing software from scratch for just 25 or 30 moving things. There's no efficiencies you get from that. By the time you're done writing it, you don't even know what you did it in the first place, because there's just not enough data points. So you have to run this system manually for a while. And what that meant is keeping an eye on the courier or the Postmate. And we also started calling in these orders at the restaurants and said, someone is going to come and pick it up. Mike's going to pick it up. Whoever is going to pick it up. Now that from that weekend on, for about 2 years, became a full-time job every day from 9 a.m. till midnight for one of the founders. What we did is one of us would run the board, especially after hours. After a while, we had a customer service person run the board during when we had to work. But when one of us wanted to go home, either Sean or me, one of us would go home, have lunch, have dinner, would let the other person know that they took control of the board. And then that person was on call from 7 o'clock until 11:30 or whenever the last orders in restaurants were accepted to place this order in, let the courier know that it's been ordered. Hundreds every day, and soon thousands every day. So it was an extremely stressful job to do that. But again, there was no infrastructure to relay these orders. And we had obviously no agreements with any of the restaurants. And that's maybe the last thing that I say, and this covers actually more than just one thing. This covers how we got it done. The beauty of Postmates and its total complexity came from the same thing. And that is that we allowed you to order from any place possible. We didn't restrict you to order from just a few restaurants we were able to sign up, because it would have been so few that the whole magic of the product would be extremely diluted. Now, would the experience have been better if we had waited until we have agreements and proper infrastructure in place to order from a handful of restaurants for these restaurants? Absolutely. But we made the decision that the overall magic and that feeling that you can get whatever you want without virtually any restriction was the far more important thing to do, even if that meant 2 or 3 years of pain, actually a lot longer. We can go into the details why, but a pain, but ultimately creating a product that where we could use the tagline "Get anything from anywhere," which was amazing. I stop here.
No, this is great. This is definitely exactly what we need to hear as founders, because we always hear the common advice: kind of do things that don't scale, as you mentioned, kind of a little bit later. But you're of course a pioneer in the in this space, and also too didn't have any playbooks to follow, right? So you kind of helped write those for us. So
and that's also incredibly hard to understand. Look, I have great respect for all my competitors, and some obviously did better than us. But when the kids from DoorDash launched, we had 3 years of grinding, and they were like, okay, we can do this in the suburbs, right? And obviously they don't want to say that, and they don't want to tell that story because it sounds not as exciting as, but again, that's also a great story, because the story goes, I want to do what Bastian did in the suburbs, and I can do it better operationally, and they clearly did for a long time. So, but that's, nobody says that, right? And so people say like, hey, oh, I had this idea, if only I could get. But there was a playbook, and you knew there was product built at Stripe to support our use case. So you could copy this service if you wanted to, right? And that's okay. I actually think some companies are great when they copy, others are great when they steal. And then we always love doing something that didn't exist. And when you want to do something that does not exist, it's incredibly hard to get data points if this is viable. And you also have very few playbooks that you can sort of that you can lean into. Now, not when it comes to running a startup. There are playbooks, and they were at the time. So just to give you an idea, but just to give you an idea how different it was, at the time, the greatest source of information about startups, and again, this is around 2009, 2010 in San Francisco, which was like an amazing time. There's the whole batch of founders that run companies, includes Airbnb and others. Everyone knew each other and they shared ideas. And there was one website, obviously by Naval and Nivi, back then it was called Venture Hacks. It was before AngelList existed, and they had the dream to turn it into AngelList. But Venture Hacks was basically just a blog that had a collection of stories for like experiences and like, this is how you structure a cap table. That was the only article that was on the internet about how you structure a cap table for a startup, which is crazy because, just yesterday, probably 6 people have written about cap table for startups just for SEO reasons on some blog somewhere, right? So it just to get the information density was just not there. So being in a place where you could talk to other people was important, but you got some of that. So you knew how to do certain things, and there were like 5 lawyers that had worked with a lot of startups, and they were at the 5 law firms, and so these things were in place, but not the operational playbook or like how do you evaluate the idea and things like that.
As I mentioned, you kind of created that for us, so we appreciate it. So you briefly mentioned it as far as the note of competition, but I think when it relates to marketplaces, as far as competing for markets and thinking about expansion and growth, how did you think about that with Postmates and expansion?
Well, we thought maybe cities where there's Uber could be great cities for Postmates, because Uber had launched like a year earlier. And I think Zimride, which would turn into Lyft, was trying to launch as well. And what we thought was like, well, there is sort of at least maybe there is an idea of what this on-demand thing means and how to position it. Well, the first city we launched in after San Francisco turned out to be a complete mistake was Seattle. And I don't like Seattle ever since because it was just such a mean city to us. And it was, we put so much effort into it, and we really tried to have them like us, but it was like, I don't know. It was like Apple coming to Seattle. It was nothing good at that time that they thought were the kids from San Francisco, and almost like immediately, like there was like a vibe that didn't feel right. So we were like, well, that wasn't so good, was it? But then I think out of intuition, the next place we launched in was LA, and that was just the bomb. I mean, I think when Uber bought Postmates, we still had almost 80% market share there. And like, I think LA single-handedly is what. First of all, there's 2 realities. So there is the reality of knowing Postmates anywhere in the United States, and of it. And then there is living in LA, and you understand what it means for LA. But what happened is, because it became popular in LA, and because the creative crowd, the people that write movies, the people that work in the industry started using it, and it was so ubiquitous in LA, they started writing it into movies and TV shows. So you have references, hundreds of references, thousands probably at this point, to Postmates, and you would have that in major movies, and you would watch that, but you would be somewhere where maybe someone else is the leader, and you had never even downloaded the app, and people would be like, that is so strange. How is this how is the verb so ubiquitous, but at the same time here, so that happened because obviously in LA we took great care of being large, way before anyone else was there. And as I said, I think the people there accepted it as part of their lifestyle. And this is, by the way, why movies from Hollywood, why they look a certain way, right? They look how the schools look in Hollywood. They look how the streets look. They look so. But it makes sense, right? You're not going to travel everywhere just to, So certain things just look Hollywood. And we got very lucky that this became one of those things where people in Hollywood like, yeah, just Postmate it, right? So then it's okay if Clooney says it, and it doesn't matter if. So other than that, we try to grow every city that we launched in faster than the previous one. And for a long time, that worked, at least initially. And that was a great chart to show during fundraising, because we thought that the outlier was Seattle, believe it or not. It looked so sad on that chart. But most of the other cities ultimately started to grow faster than the previous city we launched in. And obviously was that we wanted to prove our playbook is working. We sort of get better at it. The flywheel is working, as in sort of we know what we need to do in every city to sort of spin up certain things, and ultimately to sort of instill confidence into the people that would invest eventually in the next round.
No, you mentioned LA and you know how ubiquitous it is here. So I remember I used it for the first time here. It was such a kind of a magical and a memorable experience, as you mentioned, but also to the brand, right? That really stood out. So yeah. And so on the note of fundraising, so you of course raised what I believe it was over 900 million from some pretty awesome investors. So I guess looking back now, what were some of your biggest lessons and maybe learnings from fundraising?
Well, I don't think we were very good at fundraising compared to some of our competitors, and I think that is we got really good, but it was towards the end, and at that point it was pretty clear that we're like number 3 and that it's hard to beat number 1. So the game had shifted more to like a strategic allocation of capital versus just burn and churn and grow as fast as you can. And Tony at DoorDash had done a fantastic job at fundraising, and Travis had done a fantastic job at Uber. Even though that wasn't directly related, it would somewhat cloud our outlook. I really think one of the key moments was I think Tony managed to get a large check from SoftBank, and that was like a signal. And obviously he won that pitch, and he must have done a phenomenal job. I think he flew to Japan and met Masa, and I think he did a great job convincing him that DoorDash is the better bet, and it became the better bet, obviously. So I would try to be a lot better at raising money faster. And why was I not good at it? Because I think it ultimately had to do with me. I think there is a German sort of side in me, even though I'm a lot more American than I'm German now in my life. But it is sort of I'm very conservative in how I project externally about how things are going. And I think me being conservative when someone else it takes the hyperbole, like you can mix that up with not being convinced, but it's sort of like a German trait to maybe not ring your own bell too much and not talk too much about it, and maybe dial it down a little bit so that you're somewhere there with expectations. But I think in fundraising and learning to fundraise, I don't think that's probably the most helpful trade. I think now, obviously, being through this, you can will things into existence. We probably should have been more aggressive with our projections, should have been more aggressive with our assumptions, should have been more aggressive with projecting a belief that this is going to happen, and it's going to happen our way. So being really good at raising money, I think is this thing that now in my investments, when I talk to founders, I see who is good at it and who's not good at it. It's often the founders that really like building that are not good at it, and you sort of have this thing. Oh, let me just ship this feature, and then everything will look different. Or let me just get this out the door, and then with the next release, there's going to be some press, and then I have the numbers that I need. And I think it's actually good to like decouple these things completely. It is very difficult, but you need to have a persona for fundraising, and that needs to be this bulletproof sort of persona that you have, and that just is so convicted. And you will sometimes feel you're out of debt with the money that you raise, but I think it's necessary to be good at it. And then you have to be and then you obviously have to be a great builder. And then hopefully a lot of you don't raise money for companies that take a lot of money to make money, because you know, if you don't need to be good at fundraising if you don't need a lot of capital, right? So.
No, and it's also worth noting that the end of the kind of story, as far as the acquisition by Uber for what I believe was 2.65 billion. So
It was 5 billion at the time the deal closed. So.
Wow. Wow. I mean, that's a huge congrats. I mean, can't even imagine. So a lot of us here are early stage founders. That's, of course, what we work towards. So we're going to jump into the group questions here in a little bit, because I know we have quite a few founders that want to come on, and promise some time for them. But of course, you're also building TipTop now, and started that more recently. So, I guess, looking back, what were some of those learnings from Postmates, as a first-time founder that you've then taken with you as a second-time founder to starting TipTop?
I think there is a question that you had in your document somewhere from someone on the chat that had seen a podcast that I did. I think was Harry Stabbings, where I talked about some of the learnings, what's easier and what's harder. And I said some of the systems you learn more about how to run a company. Obviously, look, Postmates had 2,000 employees when Uber bought the company, and a million Postmates that were doing deliveries. We had lawsuits against almost every state and the government. I've seen it all in 11 years as CEO. So what I'm referring to is, when we started Postmates, certain things were just like, oh, got to do payroll, got to do it myself, and there were, so for her, you care a lot about things that are completely not important to the success of the mission, mostly because you maybe don't want to hire for it, or the tooling wasn't there at the time. But so there are just certain things that I cared about: the furniture in the office, right? What tables, and I assembled the IKEA tables myself, right? I've spent an incredible amount of time trying to find used furniture. This is an example on the smallest things, but if you do something for the first time, there is a lot of these things that you think you have to do, want to do, need to do. And the second time around, you're like, I don't care how this office looks like. Whatever. Let's just get the work done, right? Focus on the things that are extremely important. Focus on what you want to build. Keep moving. And so it's just a bunch of these things, right?
That's going to be really helpful. So yeah, I believe that was Emily that added the question to the doc. So I'm glad we could get to that. So cool. Hey, Amantha, I saw you raise your hand, and then Michael, we'll try to get to you after, because I know you added a question.
Hi, so that's a good segue into my question about hiring. So how did you look at the hiring plan at the beginning, when trying to determine what those key hires were going to be, when it's right to pull the trigger, and then evaluating quickly whether they're a good fit?
I assume early at Postmates is what's interesting, right? So I give you early at Postmates and then also TipTop, because obviously I do things differently now. I think we're pretty good at hiring in both companies. Obviously, we hire almost exclusively engineers in either companies. We had a financial analyst very early on at Postmates. Her name was Kristen Schaefer. She would become the CFO. It was a recommendation from Founders Fund. And we gave her this very unfair task. All we gave her was a CSV dump of data, anonymized delivery data. It had geo coordinates in it. It had free text in it. Had timestamps in it, and we were like, well, you're not an engineer, you can't really help here much, but maybe you can spend a weekend and look at this and tell us something that we don't know. And boy, she came and blew us all away in a presentation that started just me sitting in a little conference room we had, and after an hour, everyone was in that room and said, "Oh, okay, I'm taking some notes on how to look at data in different ways," and we hired her on the spot. But I think it was so obviously based on merit, but I like to have a mix of people in the early days of a company, and that is you have a lot of talented people that have done great things before and can bring that experience to your company. And then you have a lot of young people that are extremely hungry to learn and to become great at what they're doing. And I think if you put them together, great things will happen. Now, here's another way to look at a person who has experience in something and has worked at great companies before. So if you look at the Stanford Design School and Peter Kelly, I think it is either Peter or David, they're brothers. But I think Peter Kelly founded the Stanford Design School, and David Kelly, both of them together founded IDEO, which is a at least was for a long time probably the world's greatest interactive design studio. They helped create beautiful products, worked with Apple on a lot of things, and they have this definition of someone that they almost hire exclusively, and they call it a T-shaped person. I talked about this before. So a T-shaped person is someone who has a broad empathy across a lot of disciplines and a passion, but a deep understanding in one or two areas. So what that means is it does two things. If you have a deep understanding in one or two areas, it gives you a lot of confidence in certain topic matters. And if you at the same time have a broad empathy across a lot of other disciplines, you can appreciate them. But because you have deep expertise in one or two that are not maybe the same of another person, you also appreciate and you have the confidence to work with someone who has expertise in one of the other areas, but who also has a broad empathy across many disciplines, right? So you ultimately get people that are confident and very open to working with other confident and very knowledgeable people in certain fields. And IDEO has done this to the point that they construct the teams that they have. There are some designers, people from fields of psychology, and sort of all breeds, and they work together. And early Apple employees had that. So, and you can actually look for that, right? You can see if somebody is interested in engineering and also has an appeal for the arts or whatever else you want to sort of find out about them. And it's, in my opinion, these are wonderful people to hire. So when I say somebody who's done great things at great companies, you can see how that's a T as well, right? Because it gives you a lot of confidence if you have built great things at great companies. And now if you come where the startup, you sort of reflect some of that confidence, yet you have this openness to work with other people. There's probably an online definition of the T-shaped person, and there's a book, I think, 10 Faces of Innovation, or the IDEO Book of Innovation. That's the first one. Every founder should read it. Just period, for team dynamics.
I'll have to include a link here for founders. So, hey, Michael, do you want to jump on?
Yes. Hi, Bastian. Thanks so much for sharing your time today. I'm really curious about TipTop, and sort of building on Mike's previous question. Was there one thing that you just felt you wanted to do differently the second time around that's really motivating you, like investing more in one area or focusing more of your energy or attention in one particular area the second time around?
No, I don't think. That's not the case. I think it was more the case to do even more what I believe has to be done and not being too diluted by by a lot of people's opinion on what we should be doing instead. And if you're a first-time founder, then you talk to people, and a lot of people, they have good intentions when they tell you what you should be doing. And nobody is shy, or at least in Silicon Valley, with their opinion. And it turns out that is helpful at times, but sometimes that's also not helpful. So if I look back at some of the decisions that we made and things that I wanted to do instead at certain moments in time, but I looked for consent maybe instead of just having it my way. A lot of times, this has nothing to do with my opinion. I think it just has to do with if you're a founder, almost all this assumes that you as a founder know the matter more than anybody else that you interact with. Look, if you're a moron and you just want to do something and you're not smart and you don't put in the time and you don't know anything about the subject that you want to innovate in or the company you want to build, then that's not what I'm referring to. I'm not referring to like the stubborn goat who just wants to do it his way. I'm just talking about if you have a lot of conviction because you know a lot and you studied this space a lot, then I think it's good to just go with your conviction and not be diluted too often. And so that is probably what I'm most careful of, that I'm doing it differently this time around.
That's a great question. Thanks for sharing with us on that, Bastian. So can I definitely second that. Everyone has an advice and opinion that they seem to be willing to give to founders, right? Cool. Hey, Olivia, do you want to come on?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Mike. And hi, Bastian. Thanks so much for sharing your time with us today. This has been a really awesome group chat. So I had a product-related question. So as you were growing Postmates, can you tell us a little bit about a time when you launched a product or you had a strategy failure and then what you learned from that?
So we always tried not to be afraid of failure at Postmates, because nobody wants to fail, and we much rather like to win. But we will fail, and everybody will fail, and it's good to have the right attitude about it. A lot of people, when they fail, they don't want to try things again, or they're embarrassed about it. But if you free yourself from that fear, I think that's a powerful thing, because it's not even that you learn from failure. I'm not even sure if I believe that. But ultimately, you just have to teach yourself not to be afraid to fail, because you will fail. So you just need to accept it as a reality and don't read into failure that you shouldn't try certain things, because you have to try a lot of things. If you run a startup, your job is to test a list of prioritized hypotheses in the shortest period of time possible to get to where you want to be. You have hypotheses, you prioritize them by importance, and it's your job to prove them as fast as you can. So yes, an hypothesis can either become true or it's true or false. So you will fail with a lot of these things. One of the things that we thought would be great to do is if we launch a service called, I think we called it Postmates Dabawala, because of the famous food delivery system in India, where they have these beautiful, almost wisdom of the cloud orchestration of meals that travels through trains in and out of cities, that gets distributed. These pots return magically the next morning, and millions of workers eat that way. So we bought really big bikes that you could put food in, and we made deals with restaurants and got 100 of burritos, 100 of salads, and then people could pre-order them and would go around in routes, and we would deliver them. And it was an interesting product, but it was ultimately not successful enough. But my point is not what we did. My point is just don't bother about it if something doesn't work. The most important thing is to realize that it doesn't work and then move on. So putting something out in the world, have some clear metric in place that you can say this is successful or not. Sometimes that's hard because you feel like it needs more time, but that's also okay. Then you should come up with hypotheses for that and how you can define the way that you want to test these things, and that'll help you. That'll help you figure out if something is successful or not. I think a lot of times I see people hanging on too much on something that clearly is not successful and that won't be successful. In that instances, I think it's best to do a series of pivots to try to find a different market or an adjacent market or another angle that could work. And I think that's actually a great thing to do. So great startups do that. And your job then, obviously, as a founder, is you got to make sure that everybody is on board with that. It is in general a great idea when you start a company, in my opinion, to set the expectations with everybody in the team that this is likely not going to work and that the outcome will be different than what you thought it is, and that it's not a straight path, but you likely have to have a series of sprints and changes to get to where you want to be, but that the intent is to build a great company in that box. And I think if you communicate that, then, and by the way, you have to communicate this every day. I think there is a disease in a lot of founders. They believe they don't have to constantly repeat what's in their head to their co-founders, to the early employees, to their team. And they get tired of hearing themselves talk, and they get tired of people think they're stupid. People think, oh my God, I think I'm repeating myself. It's one of the most important, it may be the most important thing, actually. It may be the most important thing to do is to constantly reiterate, repeat, and rephrase and make sure everybody in the team understands what you're doing and why you're doing it at any moment in time. Think about it, how easy it is to misunderstood someone. Think about your partner. You say something, the other person says something back, misunderstanding, fight takes 2 seconds. Imagine how difficult it is, how easy it is to misunderstand something in the business sense. You think you articulated it perfectly. 3 people didn't get it. A week later, still questions. Part of your job as a founder is you need to constantly communicate why you're doing something, sort of focus based on the reality, and continue to tell that story at any moment in time, every day, like every meeting, every other meeting, because people otherwise can't follow. They can't follow what's in your mind. They can't follow where you want to go. They can't follow why. They need to understand why. Why are we doing this? Why do you think this has failed? Why do we move on to this? And you need to be able to tell them why that is. It's a great way for you as well to test if the decisions that you make are sound, and if somebody can follow that, if there is a certain logic behind it, if it is based on sort of a hierarchy that people can understand and that they can relate to. If your employees can, then you're already having a problem, because those are the first people that you need to convince to be with you, right? So if the people in your team can't follow that, that's probably not so good for new hires, and also not for any fundraising.
This is so good. So thanks for spending some time really going through and helping walk through some of the questions. So we're going to try to squeeze in one last question if we can. Hey, Simba, do you want to come on?
Bastian, thank you so much for talking to us today. Really appreciate it. Got a question for you around hiring. Do you think that early stage marketplaces need like a pure ops person as part of like the founding team, or one of the first few hires? And the reason why I mention this is because like as software has become more commoditized, distribution's everything, especially for marketplaces. But when you talk to a lot of VCs, most of them are SaaS investors, they really talk about your first few hires should be just engineers. What are your thoughts on that to get that person that just does the things that don't scale, whether it's like launching a market, handing out flyers, and doing all these different things?
I think that's your job, and I think you need to do all the things that you that you think you need to hire someone for, and you just need to figure it out. And you should just focusing on hiring engineers.
Just hiring engineers. Okay.
But I would never think about any of my co-founders or engineers just as engineers. I think an engineer is just a person who has an incredibly structured way of thinking about problems and who has a great way of breaking down challenges. And these are almost always superior to how a lot of other people are taught to think. I give you an idea. When Steve Jobs built the first almost fully computer and robot assembly of computers in the United States from 82 to 84 for the Macintosh. He had initially two teams working on that. The one team was a team of engineers that were construction engineers, and they had done this before, and they had all these permutations and assumptions why something should be this way. And then the second team, who ultimately was in charge of the whole setup and ran that part of manufacturing, was a bunch of software engineers, and they approached every one of these steps very differently. They didn't assume that the robot can do certain things and not. They didn't assume industry standards. And by the way, this is not to say that somebody who knows something is an idiot. It's just to say that the way that you approach a problem as an engineer and the way that you can analyze it, in my opinion, is extremely superior when it comes to complex challenges. So I don't care if it's an operational problem. I had great engineers being GMs and run markets, and they have done often a better job than people that on paper had a more related experience. I'm in general very I don't think that an operations person is necessarily someone who is a good hire in general. I've seen very few. I think operations people are ultimately managers, and I hate managers. I can't stand a manager. I don't think you need managers. You should stay away from them as long as you can. Nobody wants to work for a manager. You should build a functional org, just like Apple. Experts should lead experts. Nobody needs a manager to manage people. Turns out teaching someone how to manage people is the easier thing to learn. It's way easier to teach someone how to manage people than to teach someone computer science. So let's teach the computer science person how to teach people, and you have an expert leading a group of experts. Operations is often this position where early on you tend to hire people that worked with a lot of other people previously, and by default that makes them managers, and they see systems by building groups of people that do certain things. And an engineer would simply look at the same challenge and would say, like, okay, what can I build here that helps me achieve that? So I guess that makes it clear what my preference is.
Awesome. Thanks, Emma. That's a great last question. But, Bastian, we're almost out of time here, so definitely want to be conscious of that. But wow, this is such a great chat. So, I really appreciate taking the time to join us here today, and also, really walking through, what some of the early, days were like, and, the actual kind of journey as a founder. So I know this is going to be a memorable group chat for us all here. So we really appreciate it. And actually, I had one last question for you before we wrap things up. And that's if you could go right back to before you started Postmates and in the world of marketplaces, what would you tell yourself about them specifically?
I actually don't. I never thought about it. I never thought about it as a marketplace. I know I'm breaking hearts here, and I also don't think that marketplaces is any more a meaningful category than anything else. Look, some people like to put everything needs to fit in a drawer and needs to be neatly labeled, and I think it's overrated. It gives importance to something that shouldn't be. Your goal should be to build a great company, and whatever you need to do in order to build a great company, there are certain challenges that you face, and you'll have elements, sometimes more from one category than from the other. But all these playbooks, They're only there because you should just tear them apart. Because you look back and then there's another breakout company and they did the exact opposite then from anything that was considered to be the gold standard up to that point. I wouldn't worry about it. I would not spend my time thinking about. I just wouldn't think about it. You build something that people like. If people like your product, you'll figure out the rest. If people don't like your product, you need to figure out how you can build something that people like. All the operations people in the world, all the marketplace knowledge on the planet does not help you sell your product. It's likely because the product is not good, not because you're not an expert at marketplaces. That's my ultimate opinion.
I mean, that's a great way to wrap things up. So, and last but not least, where can we keep up with you at? Time for kind of a quick plug for you and TipTop also.
I usually just rant on Twitter, but if you can follow me on Twitter, and that's probably it. But don't expect any meaningful advice there.
Awesome. Just some cool pictures from throwbacks, right? Saw that one earlier. So
probably, yeah.
Well, cool. Well, really appreciate it. So thanks again for joining us here, and thanks everyone for the great questions today.